All right, let's jump right into one of the most incredible stories in the book of Daniel, the fiery furnace. We're going to frame this whole thing as a dramatic showdown. You've got the raw power of an earthly king on one side, and on the other, the divine power of a god who has just been publicly challenged.
And boom, this is the line that sets the whole thing in motion. This isn't just some casual question. This is a taunt, a challenge from the most powerful man on the planet. He's basically saying, who out there is bigger and badder than me? The rest of this story is a spectacular answer to that exact question.
So, let's talk about the king's opening move. In this showdown, Nebuchadnezzar makes a massive statement, putting his own power and glory on full display for literally everyone to see and to worship. I mean, talk about an ego trip. The king builds this 90-foot-tall statue made completely of gold. It's a clear attempt to one-up the statue from his dream that only had a golden head. And the proportions are, well, they're weird. A 10-to-1 height-to-width ratio is super strange for a human figure, so some scholars think it might have been more of an obelisk or just intentionally grotesque. Either way, the message was loud and clear. Look at my power. Look at my wealth.
And to kick off the dedication ceremony for this thing, he doesn't just send out a few invites. No, he summons every single high-ranking official from his entire empire. If you were anybody important, you had to be there.
You know, the text goes on to repeat this really long list of officials again and again. And as Dr. Wendy Widder points out, it almost starts to sound mocking. It just hammers home the oppressive, over-the-top grandeur of it all. This king is so powerful, he can make his entire government stop what they're doing to come to his party. Then, of course, you have the orchestra, another long, repetitive list of instruments. And the point here is to create this overwhelming experience, right? It's like a Pavlovian response. When the king's music plays, you bow. You don't think, you just react. It's obedience on command.
So here's the bottom line. The decree is brutally simple. Bow or burn. This isn't just about showing respect for the king. It's a direct command to commit idolatry, a test of loyalty that puts the captive Jews in his court in an absolutely impossible position. There is zero middle ground here.
And that, of course, brings us to the moment of defiance. 3 Jewish officials, you know them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse to play along, and it forces this impossible choice right out into the open. Now, their refusal doesn't go unnoticed. The text says some Chaldeans maliciously accuse them. And let's be real, these weren't concerned citizens. These were rivals, probably fueled by what Dr. Widder calls ethnic prejudice, and they saw a golden opportunity to get rid of their competition. Classic political maneuvering.
So you have this incredible clash of 2 totally unshakable positions. On one side, the king is demanding complete obedience, with the threat of a horrible death. And on the other, you have these 3 men with a complete, unwavering refusal. There's just no room for negotiation.
This is it. This is the only time the 3 men speak in the whole chapter, and man, do they make it count. They start by saying, yeah, our God can absolutely save us. But then comes the most important part. But if not? See, their commitment isn't a transaction. It's not, we'll be faithful if you save us. It's, we're going to be faithful no matter what happens.
As you can probably guess, that answer did not go over well. The king's pride is wounded, and now we get to the climax, where he unleashes the full force of his power in an absolute fit of rage.
Nebuchadnezzar is furious. His whole demeanor changes, and he orders the furnace to be cranked up 7 times hotter than usual. Now, the number 7 often symbolizes completion or perfection, so basically he's saying make it as hot as it can possibly get. This isn't just a furnace anymore, it's a physical symbol of the king's all-consuming rage.
And this is where the king's power just spectacularly backfires on him. He picks his strongest, mightiest soldiers to do the deed, but the furnace is so insanely hot that these elite soldiers are killed instantly just by getting close. Meanwhile, the guys they were throwing in, who are bound up and wearing flammable clothes, fall into the fire completely unharmed. It's just a beautiful, stunning piece of irony.
So the king is probably thinking he's won. He's made his point. But then he looks into those flames, and he sees something that turns his rage into pure astonishment. He sees the divine answer to his arrogant challenge.
The king literally leaps to his feet, completely bewildered. He asks his counselors, hey, wait a minute, didn't we throw 3 guys in there? And they're like, yep, that's right, king. But he says, look, I see 4 men, and they're just walking around totally fine. And that 4th one, he looks like a divine being.
Okay, now this is a really important distinction to make.
When a pagan king like Nebuchadnezzar says a son of the gods, he's not having some kind of Christian theological breakthrough. From his worldview, that just means a supernatural being, a divine figure, an angel. He's simply recognizing that a power far greater than his own has just entered the arena.
So you have to ask, why was the angel there? I mean, God could have saved them without sending anyone. Well, according to Dr. Widder's analysis, that fourth man was a message sent directly to Nebuchadnezzar. It was the visual answer to his challenge. It proved this wasn't some trick, it was divine power. And most powerfully, it showed that God didn't just rescue them from the fire, he was present with them in it. All right, the showdown is over. Let's look at the final verdict and pull out the key takeaways from this incredible story about power, faith, and what deliverance really means. So Nebuchadnezzar calls them out, and they just walk out of that inferno. And get this, they are completely untouched. Not a hair on their head is singed, their clothes are fine, they don't even smell like smoke. The only things that got burned up were the ropes that had tied them down. They went in as captives, and they walked out free. So what's the verdict? Well, Nebuchadnezzar admits defeat, at least for a little while. He acknowledges that the God of Israel is superior. But the story's real takeaways for us are about faith. It shows that true commitment isn't transactional. It's not about getting fire insurance. It all comes back to that but if not principle. And it leaves us with this powerful idea that God's promise isn't always to save us from our trials, but to be present with us in them.
And that really is the question this story leaves us with, isn't it? In a world where nothing is ever guaranteed, where we don't know the outcomes, what does it actually look like to stand firm in our convictions? What does faithfulness look like when you have no idea what's going to happen next?